Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I am your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, the author of numerous books, most of them novels, and a whole bunch of nonfiction books. And it's good to be on the show again with you, Aaron.
Likewise, Pops. With us today, we have nobody. So it's back to you and us. We've had a nice string of weeks with some guests and missing some people this week. We were hoping to have a couple people on. Jim Watkins, we talked about. I wanted to have Steve on the cast. He was hoping to watch tonight, but he wasn't able to. Those of you who've watched old school First in Fiction, you know Steve McLean and exactly how outrageous he could be. So I think he has a thing or two he could say about humor in fiction. But this has been a long time coming, Pops. We've been scheduling this and having to table it because we've had the good fortune of having some other guests lined up that had some other topics to discuss. But humor and fiction, today is the week. This week is it. We are here and we're talking some funny jokes. Hopefully it will be funny and entertaining, but if nothing else, it will at least be informational.
I think my agent thinks my career is a joke, but he's not laughing, so.
But bunch.
Well, and there's the first volley.
Hey, breaking the ice.
Yeah.
And falling in and drowning slowly. Anyhow, moving on. So we had the publishing term of the day all lined up for you guys, and then we decided to throw a bit of a curveball. Pops, you got something, a little special set piece, if you will, right behind you. So you wanted to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story and make sure I move the correct way here. Let me put this on myself so I can make sure I'm moving the right way. This way. See, it's backwards for me. There we go. And you look in the back here and you see a typewriter. That is a 1950s KMG, the G stands for gray as opposed to black, Royal Standard typewriter. And it is a bit of a dinosaur. It is older than me. I'm glad the grandkids aren't around going, oh, wow.
So is that like Jurassic time period or Jurassic? Where does that fall on the scale?
Yeah, it's a Jurassic typewriter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get that from cloning the DNA of the typewriters? You found some trapped in amber, maybe?
No, but these were popular with the T-Rexes because they have those itty-bitty arms, So, you need the bigger typewriter to be able to reach the keys with that. No, your mom was out, looking around at stuff, and she came across that thing at the, I think it was the Salvation Army, and sent me a picture of it. And I've been griping for years that I don't have an old standard typewriter. And she showed it to me, and I caved and said, go ahead and bring it home because it was in such good condition with that. But that's our publishing term for the day, believe it or not, is typewriter. And you say, why in the world would that be a publishing term? Because no one uses typewriters today. First, let me tell you that's not true. There are still writers who use typewriters. And David McCullough is one of them. He's a historian, Pulitzer Prize winner a couple times over. His latest book is about the Wright brothers, but he's also written a long time ago. The first biography I ever read all the way through it was for Truman, Harry Truman. And to this day, and he's an elderly man now, he's in his 80s, but he still sits down every day at a typewriter, just like the one we showed you. It's the same model, I think a couple of years earlier, perhaps, and he cranks out his books on it. And he just has it fixed every once in a while and keeps going. He doesn't want to use a computer because he does not want to write fast. He wants to write slow, and that's his way of doing it. And just to give a little respect to these typewriters, like this one back here. Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451 on the same model. Of course, it was in a library. I had to pay to use it because he didn't have one at the time. But in a library, Hemingway used one for a while. There's just any number of writers that you can think of that use those things. But here's the publishing term for the day. Typewriter, when we use the word, we think of the machine that I just showed you with all the keys, the clack, 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 and all of that wonderful stuff. But initially, the word referred to the person using the typewriter. The typewriter was the person, not the machine. and the word became associated with both for a long time. So the typewriter was the person operating it, and they were working on a typewriter. So it's a typewriter working on a typewriter, and then later just came to mean the machine that we call a typewriter. So technically, a typewriter, and you could be on Jeopardy someday and need to know this, can also refer to the individual. So it's a little different than what we've been doing, but we were able to work in my typewriter.
I've been considering getting a typewriter myself, but as I understand it, the software updates are few and far between. So
it is really hard to send email with one.
Yeah. What does that run in Windows 92?
Windows 1.
Windows 1.0. So
this one case would be Windows 1950 is what it would be for that particular one. So yeah, a lot has changed.
I'm teaching my students how to type. I've got a typing portion in this yearbook class that I'm teaching, and trying to teach them the proper technique. And it's kind of funny because the gentleman who invented the QWERTY keyboard originally did it because his typewriters were so fast that they kept jamming the typewriters. And so he thought, well, I'll slow them down by mixing up all the keys. And then they eventually still became so fast that they started jamming all those up as well. So a little bit of irony there, but I keep telling my students to follow the proper form so that they can go a little bit faster. And I asked you, when you showed me that, I asked, are you so fast on this that you jam up the keys on that, or what you called them, the strikers?
Yeah, well, the keys, yeah, the key set. I used to do that. I had a different kind of Royal. It was a portable when I was a kid. I was in high school, I think, when I got it in 1962, which is before my high school days. So, but the same model hung around for quite a while. And so it was a beautiful little portable typewriter, and I used to stick the keys on that all the time. Not just, two of them. I'd have 6 or 7. Yeah, it'd be a traffic jam because I would start typing so fast. There's some irony in all that, which is, I know we're still not quite on topic yet, but there's some irony in all of that. When I went to school, the things I hated most were typing class. I hated typing. And I said, I'm going into architecture, which I did for 10 years. But I said, what am I going to use typing for? I'll never use typing. Well, what do I do all day? I hated English. Yeah, there's another great joke on me with all of that. I did not like history, and I've done several history books, and then I've done novels with historical themes in them, including some World War II stuff. So all those things I hated became the very things I use today the most. So these old typewriters, just a way of recalling how far we've come.
Call that situational irony or cosmic irony, if you want. But irony is actually an essential element of humor. You see, did you see how I bridged that?
Yes, that was a good transition.
That was a quality transition. It's like I planned it, but I didn't. Even if I did, I would probably tell you that I didn't, but I genuinely didn't plan that. But irony is a fundamental element of humor and how that works, the process by it. I remember reading some time ago an article about why humor works, and one of the things that it was stressing is the irony, the unexpected twist at the end. That's what a setup does. It sets you up for the punchline, because the punchline then comes from a different angle that you had not anticipated. So we're going to get into that a little bit later, but first, just a little bit about the topic and humor in fiction. This is not to say that for those who are writing comedy. Comedy books are fantastic. One of the greatest books I've read was Couplehood by Paul Reiser, and then the follow-up, Babyhood by Paul Reiser. It's one of those books that you read in public at your own risk, because you will look like a lunatic. You'll be laughing so hard. And it was hilarious. Ellen DeGeneres has a book out that I understand is very, very funny. But at the same rate, that's not necessarily what we're talking about. We are talking more about adding humorous elements into your fiction. So you're writing a suspense, you're writing an intrigue, you're writing a historical romance, whatever it is that you're writing, there should still be some moments of comedy in there. And it's important for a variety of reasons, most notably because it really relieves the tension that you've been building and the conflict, and it can be a nice breather for the reader to have. And so we want to talk today a little bit about what humor is, how you can put it into your novels, how to get the most bang for your buck, some of the good writers that exist out there that do a good job of putting humor into their books, etc. So that's what we thought we'd take a quick look at today.
Yeah, and it's an important part because you will see humor in even the most serious books. Some of the best laughs I've ever received have been from the writings of Dean Koontz. You would think, well, that doesn't quite go together. He's done a couple that are just a hoot, and I had the problem you were talking about. I was, my wife was gone, and so I was at some restaurant someplace eating by myself, reading this book, and I kept bursting out in laughter. So that I thought they were going to ask me to leave. But I just didn't expect the humor. It came out of nowhere, and it was great. It didn't take away from the tension or the suspense at all, but it gave me a breather before I moved into the really dark stuff. So yeah, it's can be used in all forms of fiction. Some of the best writers like Mark Twain, of course, Shakespeare always sent in the clowns at one point or another. Mark Twain was just great at weaving some humor in. Sometimes the whole book was humorous. Other times, not so much. It would just be a line or two here and there when you least expect it. So very, very useful in any form of fiction.
Absolutely. You've got a couple quotes here from David Bouchier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's from a book called Creating Fiction, and these are a bunch of people who teach at one of the more famous writing conferences, and they compiled all these essays from different writers together. And he does a lot of stuff for National Public Radio, and he writes humor. And one of the things he said, one sure way to make your fiction more appealing is to add a carefully calculated dose of humor. And note carefully calculated, that it doesn't happen by accident, it's a plan. And he also said Shakespeare understood that life is funny at least as often as it is tragic. So you get Shakespeare's comedies and his tragedies. So he had some good insights into that, and we'll touch base with him again as we move along.
Absolutely, yeah. So and I just want to reiterate that when we have these moments of tension and conflict, darkness can become very overwhelming, and we need a moment to laugh. And I think sometimes at those tense moments that humor helps us to laugh, not only at someone else or some other situation, but also at ourselves a little bit for buying into it. But I like what you say about the carefully calculated humor. And that's the idea that the humor that you're using should be intentional. If it's organic, that's great. I've got a lot of organic humor in the Hand of Adonai series, or at least I like to think I do. From a character named Erica, who quickly became my favorite. And part of the reason why is because her character is the one who's going to make the joke. She's very witty. She's very dry. She's got a little bit of my sense of humor to her. And she's the one who can, even though the stakes are very, very high and they're, playing a video game for their lives, essentially, she is the one who can step outside of that and still crack a joke, and it lightens the mood just enough. And her jokes are not forced. I'm not sitting there planning them out very far in ahead. They come organically, but they also come at the right times. You do want to make sure that your humor is not coming at an inappropriate time. For example, when you really want to heighten that tension and that stress, if you do something that's unintentionally funny, that can really kind of cut your feet out from underneath you. So you want to avoid that and make sure that the jokes are coming at the appropriate times where it will provide the appropriate response, a quick laugh, and then back to the heaviness, if that's kind of the thing, back to the tension as it may be. Let it be organic. It should feel organic, even if you have to plan it out. It should at least feel organic in the story.
Yeah, and as you say that, I'm thinking about a guy named Spider Robinson. And he wrote a lot of science fiction. And my favorite books of his were called the Callahan Barr series. And he used a lot of humor in it. But so folks who may not be familiar with Spider Robinson, he was and is, I think, still a hippie kind of guy. And that carried over into his writing. But he created a place called Callahan's Bar, and it's a place where if you have a problem, no matter what the tragedy is, sooner or later you end up there. So really, it is a whole group of people who get together and drink, and they've had the worst possible things happen in their lives. And the main character, Jake, lost his family because the brakes went out on his car. And the reason the brakes went out on his car is he wanted to save a few bucks and did the work himself. And so now he feels responsible, he feels guilty, and he can't get over that. And he ended up at Callahan's Bar. He had no idea how he got there because you can't really see the place. But he ended up there to drown his sorrows, and he found people just like him. And one of the ways they pass the time is to tell stupid jokes on certain nights, like Tuesday nights. It's pun night. And I remember laughing out loud. Normally I don't do that when I read, but I almost fell off the couch laughing so hard at some of these. And if you come to it at first, you think, well, this guy's just using this as a vehicle to tell jokes or to create funny situations. But he's not. What he's doing it is using that kind of humor and those kinds of laughs to get us to understand that these are very broken people. And this is how they're healing themselves, and this is how they're encouraging one another, because, putting your arm around them saying, gee, they're there, it's all going to be fine, isn't going to work for them. And of course, it's a sci-fi thing, so some of these broken people are interdimensional beings. They're from other planets. There's a talking dog who carries on conversations. There's a robot, an android-type robot, has his own set of problems. And so it's a series of stories about how they help one another. And but he uses a ton of humor, and it makes the poignant parts all the more poignant. So beautifully done.
Well said. I like the fact that you lulled. It's what the kids are calling it these days, laughing out loud.
Oh,
lulls. Lulls, they say. You're not really laughing. You're just saying lulls. That's not the same thing. But anyhow, they think it's great. You make a really good point, though, about that, the poignancy of it. We heal through humor quite often. And we had Tom Morrissey on some months ago, where we talked about how writing for men, we talked about how men often use gallows humor, that dark humor, where we look death in the face and we laugh at it a little bit. We have these tragic situations. The alternative is to laugh or to cry. And so a lot of us, perhaps as a defense mechanism, perhaps as a healing mechanism, will crack a joke. And humor is a really, really good way to develop your characters, because you'll have some characters who just don't get humor, or they're cracking jokes at wildly inappropriate times. They're still trying to figure out what jokes are funny, and when they're not, when they're appropriate to tell and when they're not, who you can make fun of, who you can't, which characters can take a joke, which can't. One of the most important life lessons I ever learned is from a really good friend of mine who used to make fun of himself quite often. Very self-deprecating humor. And I remember asking him one time, why do you do that? Why do you make fun of yourself? And he goes, if I'm laughing at me, then nobody else can laugh at me. They can only laugh with me. And I thought, well, that's, tragically sad, but also very poignant. And he learned to take the lesser socially desirable parts of himself and call attention to it, as a way of perhaps masking insecurity, or perhaps turning it into a strength, strengthening his sense of humor. This was a guy who never wanted for friends, just a real joy to be around, and people would line up and to hang out with him. He's just a real good guy. And so I think there's that aspect too. When you're developing characters, don't be afraid to contemplate what their sense of humor looks like. Are they really witty? Do they like to tell really terrible puns? And by that I mean, are they pastors? Is that their go-to joke, or what is it? What is it that do they not laugh? One of the greatest characters on television right now is Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, who's entirely funny because he doesn't understand humor. Right. And so there's that ironic twist of the guy who doesn't understand humor is generally the funniest and says the funniest things, because everybody else sets him up for the punchline, and he always gives a punchline that's we don't necessarily anticipate, or not what normal people would anticipate. So humor can serve as a way to really develop your characters as well.
Yeah, that's a good illustration of the Sheldon character. And so half the time we're laughing at him, but we're also laughing with him. I also had an acquaintance. It was my brother's friend. My brother was old enough to be my father. But anyway, the guy had been a pilot in the Korean War, and he always made fun of his looks. And finally, when we asked him why he did that all the time, he says, if I make fun of myself first, no one else makes fun of me. And so it was a defense mechanism for him. And it worked for him. I don't know all the psychology of that. We'll leave that up to professionals to figure out. But that's one of the things that he did. Laughter does allow us to breathe in real life and then also in fiction. Comedic relief.
It does allow us to breathe, and we need we need that moment. We need the comedic relief, comedy relief, isn't it? I mean, we need that relief. We need that moment to endure more, up those stakes. Then that's something that you want to do is provide a moment for people to laugh. So you will elevate the stakes, and then you'll let them laugh, and then you'll continue to elevate the stakes even afterward, because now you have a higher threshold than you did before. Whereas your threshold may have only been here, now we've got it up here a little bit more, and that's going to continue to raise the ceiling, if you will, raise the roof, as the kids say these days. But it allows us that moment of reprieve to collect ourselves and to journey on forward toward the journey ahead.
Yeah, and if it's all tension, it gets in a book. It's very difficult to follow the book all the way to the end. So again, we're not talking about telling jokes. You can get away with that once or twice if you have a character who that would be their normal response. There's a movie, Capricorn 1. Trying to remember some of the stars of that. Some of them will come to me in a little bit. But anyway, they were forced to fake the moon landing. That was the basic idea. But one of the astronauts, his character, he was always telling jokes. And so in one of the worst possible times in his life, he's having to climb this cliff. And it's an arduous climb. It's life and death for him. And he's by himself. And so he begins to tell himself a joke. It's a long joke. It's a 10-minute joke for this guy to get up the mountain side. But that's exactly what he would do. The others wouldn't do that. It's not in their character. So it worked fine in the screenplay, in the movie. But you have to be very careful trying to pull that off in a book. Because, and this is one of the things to remember is we don't, in our writing, it's difficult for us to give visual cues. So if you're watching a stand-up comedian, they make faces. They do a lot of body gestures. They do things to sometimes they scream to make you a little uncomfortable, whatever it is to get you to laugh. In a book, you don't have that. You have to show that in the writing. And so it's often more challenging, I think, to try to slip humor into, say, a suspense novel or a romance novel, Western, whatever it might be, and still have it all hold together.
I agree. That's a very difficult thing. You don't have the slapstick angle. You can't. I love Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live. He's one of my favorites. But 90% of what he did was, falling through walls and fat guy jokes. And that only plays so far. You can't. It's hard to do that in fiction where you're writing, and then he fell through the coffee table and it exploded into splinters. Ha ha ha. Well, it doesn't have the same kind of visual, auditory gag reflex, laugh reflex. Gag reflex is something else. Some of you might have gag reflexes while watching Chris Farley, but I thought he was great. But since it's hard to set that up, and it also feels, I'm going to say, very disingenuous. It feels like you're forcing it. It doesn't feel very organic when you have the slapstick humor. If I were to write a scene of people, here's a great story. Eating breakfast with Shondell, my sister, is always an adventure if there are potatoes on the plate, because they are going to end up somewhere, usually not her mouth. Usually it's in the back of the guy's head behind us, or just so many things falling off her plate. It's slapstick humor. But if I were to write that in a scene, people would tend to think, no, that's forced. That he's really going for the joke here when that wouldn't really happen. Well, it does really happen, but it doesn't feel like it does. And therefore it feels forced. It feels set up, and it loses that sense of organic kind of comedy. And so I would say that you probably want to avoid that. There are writers who can pull it off very, very well. I don't think I'm one of them. So knowing your limits is also a good point here. What are you good at writing? For me, a lot of my humor comes from dialogue, from the witty banter that you'll get from time to time. That's where I find most of my humor comes.
Yeah. And that's what it helps to have an outside person judge whether or not what you've written is funny or humorous. Again, it doesn't have to be a knee slapper. It can just cause a smile, and that helps out quite a bit. I had a scene in one of my earlier books. Two men been thrown off this boat. They're left to drown, and one is still battered, but he's still strong enough to try to help the other one to shore. But he's like 12 miles offshore or something like that. And to keep the other guy's spirits up, he begins to tell this long joke. And of course, I interweave it with all that he's going through and the pain and stuff like that. So it's a little funny, a little more pain, a little funny, more fear kind of thing. When I went to my editor, I get this little note back, and the little note is, "Are you sure you want to tell a joke in this particular scene?" Well, of course I do. Here's what I'm trying to achieve. And it was time I was done explaining it, I realized that I needed to go take the thing out because it wasn't working. And the fact that he questioned it made me question it. And so it's good to see if anyone else gets the humor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You definitely want some test readers for that. I recently read The Killing Joke, which is a graphic novel, Batman graphic novel, very graphic, by the way. But it's called The Killing Joke, and it culminates with a final joke at the end between Batman and Joker. And Joker tells Batman a joke, and they end up, I don't think, I mean, spoiler alerts here. So if you want to read it, just pause the cast or whatever and go read it. But Joker tells Batman a joke, and they both end up laughing. Well, is that a satisfying conclusion? I don't know. Some say yes, some say no. But the whole thrust of the piece of the graphic novel is that one really, really, really bad day can make anybody go crazy. And so, of course, the joke centers on a couple people in an insane asylum. And of course, you've got the layers there of Joker being, psychotic, sociopathic, I think is the term for him. And all of Batman's villains really are, just different shades of different mental illnesses. And so you've got that whole layer working. You've got the layer of he was originally a stand-up comedian that wasn't very good. And so there's a lot of layers working together to try and get that payoff at the end. And even with that, I think some people would say, you know what, I just didn't feel like that was the proper ending. The joke I didn't think was funny enough. But almost, I think there's a point where you have to say, this joke wasn't about lulls. It wasn't about the laughing out loud. It was about one really bad day and the line between sanity and insanity, and where that line is drawn and how people draw it. And, the tension between Joker and Batman, of course, being very much opposites of each other, the antithesis of each other. And so there's a lot going on there. And I think if you've got that going, then sometimes you can pull the joke off. But again, like you say, have somebody else read it and make sure that it is going to land the way you want it to land.
Right. And that's sometimes hard to do. And stand-up comedians, which is really beyond our topic, but they keep testing. They go to the small comedy clubs. They test their material till they find what's getting the laughs and what's not. So I think it's always good to return to what you wrote that's supposed to have a humorous effect as you read through it, and ask yourself, is it still funny? Or is it sometimes just something meant to raise a smile and that's it? Or to give a little breather, whatever it may be, but does it achieve those things? And so you have to be self-critical of it.
You absolutely do. You have to be self-critical. Yeah. So what is it that makes something funny? If we can get a little meta here and talk about why humor is humorous, what's funny about it. Depends on who you ask. There's lots of research to demonstrate this, but typically that laughing response is usually from something that's unexpected, some sort of twist, something that we are given to expect based on social norms that then somehow gets turned on its head. And that's what we find amusing, is that things didn't end up the way that we thought they would end up. And so for me, I think that's what genuinely and generally makes the funniest things. And that can be from a response, that can be from a dialogue, that can be a lot of times in metaphors, figurative language, surprising comparisons and similes can be very funny. Uh, I like the list of some of the worst metaphors and similes written because they're perhaps unintentionally funny, but they're very funny. Like what is it? The boat gently sailed across the lake exactly the way a bowling ball wouldn't. It's like, well, that's just a bad comparison, but it's funny because we expect two similar things to be compared, and here we're comparing it to something that's completely unexpected. Or what is it? Her hair glistened in the rain like nose hair after a sneeze, and it's like, well, it's not what we're going for here, but it's kind of funny. So those unexpected twists, the irony of it, can be very amusing. Tess mentions in our chat room here that that we should probably define irony, because a lot of people take it to mean coincidence. If you're listening to Alanis Morissette, you're probably thinking of irony wrong. It's not coincidence. It's when you expect A to happen and it's B, in fact, that happens. So I'm trying to think of a good example of irony here, Pops. You want to help me out? Put you on the spot?
No, I like you twisting in the wind. It's funny.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're right.
It's about
irony, which is different than the way most people use the word irony. So when writers are getting together like this and we talk about irony, usually we're referring to the literary irony, where the unexpected occurs. The twist in the tale sometimes will do that, and it will then, in that case, be ironic, not just unexpected, but it has to tie into whatever set it up. And it's used a lot in literature, especially short stories. O. Henry's The Gift is ironic in a literary sense, and that is, this has been around long enough, so you don't need a spoiler alert on this thing. But it's a young, poor couple who want to buy each other a Christmas gift, and they don't have any money. And she has her long, beautiful hair, so the man goes out and he sells his watch or his watch fob, I can't remember, for a pocket watch, to make the money to buy her a hair comb, a pretty hair comb. She goes out and has her hair cut and sells her hair so she could buy him something for his watch. I think it was the fob. So he sold his watch, that's what it was, and she goes out and buys him a fob, the little chain that's going to hold the thing. So on Christmas Day, they each end up giving one another a gift that neither can use. And so it's sort of bitter irony.
It was the best Christmas ever.
Ever.
Charlie Brown was there. Snoopy was there. It sounds like a Charlie Brown.
And God bless them all.
God bless them, everyone. The one of my favorite stories to demonstrate all three types of irony is The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe, which has dramatic irony. It's got situational irony and verbal irony. Verbal irony is when you say something you don't believe. So the setup of The Cask of Amontillado is the first line is the 1,000 insults of Fortunato I had borne as best, or the 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when it ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. So this guy's going to enact his revenge on Fortunato, who's a drunkard. And so Montresor, who is the first person narrator, tempts not Fortunato. I'm getting my pose mixed up. Tempts. Wow, what was the name I just said? Did I say Fortunato?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, that's right. It's Prince Prospero that's from Mask of the Red Death. I apologize. It's been a long day. So he tempts Fortunato with this cask of Amontillado, which is a particular type of wine. He wants him to come down into the wine cellar, back into the catacombs, where he's got this very special cask of wine that he's going to give him. And then when he gets there, of course, he just walls him in. He chains him to the wall and builds the wall up around him. Well, the verbal irony there is when you say something that you don't believe. And so as Fortunato is descending into the dark, dank caves, he's coughing and he's wheezing. He's got some sort of lung thing going on, you can tell. And Montresor says, well, we should go back up. I don't want you to be sick. I don't want you to be sick. Well, of course you want him to be sick. You hate him. You're bringing him down there to kill him, you know? And then the dramatic irony is that the reader understands something that the character doesn't, right? So we know that Montresor is going to kill Fortunato. We know that from the first line, but there's that dramatic irony because Fortunato doesn't know that. And so he's willfully, even gleefully, working himself closer to his murder. And then the last one is kind of the situational irony or cosmic irony. And in it, you would think that because Montresor is able to kill Fortunato and get away with it, that he would be happy that he's succeeded. But he keeps coming back down and staring at the wall. And you get the sense that this didn't work out the way he had intended. So that was an unexpected part on him. None of it's really funny, by the way. Like, you're not laughing as you read this. But those are the types of irony that you will see. And that kind of irony can be humorous.
So irony does have a different meaning in literature than the way most people use that. And you're also talking, I think, a little bit here, Aaron, about the element of surprise in humor. You got a great list of 3 things with the setup, things that are inevitable. Tell us about that.
Okay, so when you list things, again, it's the surprise, it's the twist, it's the unexpected. And so what you do is you've got a setup, and humor really works on these setups and these punchlines, the deliveries. You can vary it to where you have a couple funny things at the beginning and then the expected thing at the end. But normally what you see is you'll list things that will get people to think in one direction, to anticipate something. So you might say things like things that are inevitable. So if you're making a simile or a metaphor and you think, okay, the tide is as inevitable as, okay, well, you can think of a couple things: death, taxes, but then you might go with something that's a little unexpected but no less true: celebrity drama in the grocery store checkout aisle. You know, of course that's inevitable. You're going to see that, but it's not what people expect. They expect the death, they expect the taxes. That's kind of easy. So you can take kind of a cliche and then twist it. Cliches work well for this because people already know what to expect. And so when you turn it on its head, that's what becomes unexpected, and it's humorous to us. Oh, that's amusing. I'd not anticipated that you would go in that direction. But because you went there, thereby funny.
Yeah, and that's really the definition of humor. I used to deliver a speech about your life as a joke, and then I went on to describe what a joke was and why that wasn't so bad. And a joke is a list of things with a twist at the end. It has something that is just unexpected, and that's what makes it funny. And that's what you're describing there, the things that are inevitable: death, taxes, and celebrity drama in the grocery checkout aisle. They don't really go together because the first 2 set you up for negative things: death, taxes. Then this other stuff is so trivial that it comes across as funny just by the comparison. And those are great if you can work those out. And that's the way humor works. And there have been a lot of studies and stuff on it, but really, I think you just get a feel for it. Sometimes it's the character, if you have a funny character. So I'm thinking of Cervantes' Don Quixote, who is both a sad figure and a funny figure. He thinks he's a knight errant, and he's fighting beasts that are really windmills. And he cobbles together his own suit of armor, and his helmet is a shaving basin, you know, that you put water and soap in and stuff. And that's what he puts on his head. You know, now his head is protected. Now he just looks ridiculous. And everyone, including the readers, can see this, but he can't see it. And over time, it endears him to the reader. You start liking this guy, even though he doesn't have, his elevator doesn't go all the way to the top. But he is noble. He is not necessarily the sanest man in the room, but he is the noblest man in the room. And that little contrast makes a great story, a poignant story, but it's still got a lot of humor in it.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah. I think that was recently rated. I can't remember who rated it. Writer's Digest maybe is the greatest novel ever written. The one novel that everybody should read. So Don Quixote, very, very classic novel. Like you say, it's a funny character. You laugh at him, but it's also somewhat tragic. Um, and there is kind of that, like you say, he's the noblest man in the room. Hyperbole is another avenue for humor. You see stand-up comedians do that, and they'll usually start with the setup. So they'll say something like, I'm very insecure. I have dreams all the time of like that are based in my insecurity, like the other day. And now you're anticipating, as the audience, you're anticipating that somebody's made fun of him, that he, maybe had the dream where he's, shows up to school in his underwear or whatever the case is. But then they take it, they misdirect, right? They direct you to think that way, but then they surprise you by coming in with something like, I had a dream I was attacked by a shark. And then after one bite, the shark started to swim away. And I started swimming after the shark, saying, come back. I can change for you. Why don't you like me? I'll gain weight. I'll eat every day. So you can kind of hyperbolize this idea and take it to just really extravagant and strange levels, and that can be comedic in itself.
Testagrood gets an LOL. Mary had a little lamb and a bit of gravy.
Oh. Well,
that's a perfect example. It's a perfect example of the twist that we're talking about. Hilarious. High five, Tess. You made me laugh out loud right in the middle of Aaron while he's talking. So
I thought you were laughing at my joke. My joke wasn't funny?
No, I read that, and that's my kind of sick humor.
Oh, sad days. All right.
Yeah.
A little bit of mint jelly. So excellent. And then, of course, you've got the incongruous juxtaposition where you take two things that are they contrast. They look very different, but you put them together to show some sort of paradox. You've got an example here, Pops, of the incongruous juxtaposition.
Well, mine is really an example of incongruity as a form of humor. And I got this from the same guy we were quoting a little bit earlier, from that same essay. He wrote, wit, W-I-T, that is, skillful humor. Wit is the unexpected copulation of ideas. Now you have to stop and think about that for a second, because I don't think many of us would have chosen copulation to use in that sentence. And that's why the sentence is wacky and it's funny. He knows that. You read the rest of the essay, the guy can write. But that's what he's trying to do, is he's trying to demonstrate with his first sentence in that under that subhead by using a word that just doesn't fit with the rest of the essay or that sentence. It's incongruous with that. We would have said wit is the unexpected blending of ideas, or pairing of ideas, or contrasting ideas. But he used a sexual term, copulation, and that gets everyone's attention. So just using that one word introduced a little bit of humor into his essay.
Yeah, and so what you're talking about here is the word choice that we have, our arsenal of vocabulary, our diction, choosing the right word. Like you say, just the twist of the one word, choosing the one word as opposed to the other, can become a very very funny thing. That's very witty kind of a thing as well. So don't underestimate the power of your words, and the power of one word specifically to find that twist or that trope that's going to really kind of elevate the joke that you're going for. Kurt Vonnegut Jr. did that all the time. I think it's because he was just a dirty old man, but some of his stuff is just uproariously funny. He's got outrageous situations. I'm thinking of Cat's Cradle, where the entire world is in danger of, I think it's called I-9 or something like that, that's supposed to like evaporate all the water on the planet. And he creates this entirely fictional religion called Bokonism. Can't even remember. It's been a while, but the whole situation is just so bizarre and outlandish that you've got people falling in love who aren't supposed to be falling in love, and he's got all these little dirty jokes scattered throughout. Slaughterhouse-Five is the same way, and it's just absurdity, just absolute absurdity. And he will break the fourth wall to do it. He'll actually address the reader directly. As Kurt Vonnegut in his novel Breakfast of Champions, Kurt Vonnegut is a character in the book, and he's at one point running away from Dobermans and jumping over a fence, and his pants are tearing, and it's kind of ridiculous that he gets to that extent with it, but it's humorous because you know kind of where he's coming from. The first few lines of that book are something to the effect of, this is a story that takes place on Earth. Earth was a planet that was full of all sorts of stupid people before they decided to kill themselves. And so it's like narrated by some futuristic alien race that, after the death of the planet or whatever the case may be. And it's just so absurd, but it sounds like a history lesson that an alien might receive. And that's what makes it so just outlandish and comedic. But at the same time, his humor unlocks doors for the reader to see a part of humanity that they may not have otherwise seen. When you're talking about Slaughterhouse-Five, when you're talking about the issues that he's dealing with in that novel, and the firebombing of Dresden, and the mass murder, if you want to call it that, or at least mass killings of the Germans in that city, and even many of the American POWs, that's a really heavy topic. And how do you talk about that and laugh? Well, he finds a way to do it, because like we said with the gallows humor, at some point, if we're not laughing, then we are, the alternative is that we're overwhelmed by the amount of oppressive kind of weight of the subject matter. And so he alleviates that with a lot of those kind of comedic, almost one-liners that he delivers throughout. He's a very funny guy, very interesting worldview. And that's another aspect of humor that we haven't talked a lot about, but your particular worldview, how you see the world, and how you translate that to your audience, how you explain that to your audience, looking at the world in ways that other people don't, seeing the absurdity in our culture, and satire is a great vehicle for that, and for humor, poking fun at the things that we do that make no sense at all. Buckling up on a airplane, like that's going to do much to save you. The only thing it's going to keep you from doing is reaching your air mask that's falling out here somewhere. You can't reach it because your seatbelt's on. Finding these absurd ideas and pointing it out, that we as a society can be very ridiculous at times, and being able to laugh at ourselves is a very powerful thing.
Yeah. I always wanted the stewardess to say, this mask will drop down, put it over your head, put the mask on your face. It won't do any good, but it will muffle some of the screams.
Exactly.
And when I was growing up, and you develop this kind of dark humor sometimes, we used to have to go through air raid drills. And the thing they taught us in school, that if the air raid sirens go off, and so the mean old Ruskies are sending nuclear bombs our way, the best thing we could do is get under our desk. And then I got old enough to realize the only thing that would do is help them identify the bodies. I mean, there's just no, it would absolutely make no sense to be able to do that. But nonetheless, it went on. So you start making some kind of humor out of that. I had down here under irony. I know we've kind of batted irony around in different places here, but I forgot that I listed Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And this is just for the whole book. Now, this was the irony of it, where these characters are off searching for the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. They're looking for the answer to the meaning of life and the universe and everything. And they finally discover that the answer is 42, which means absolutely nothing. And that, of course, is the irony. So this whole book and all the searching and everything they go through gets them the answer that they want, but the answer means nothing. So kind of a waste of time.
Exactly. So what is it, the political cartoon, or just the little cartoons? Somebody's asking the guru, what's the meaning of life? And the guru says, I'm not sure, the computers are down. No internet connection right now up here. So But a couple comments from the room. We've had an active room. Jenny and Tess getting some comments here. I don't know if you saw Jenny's comment, Pops, that her dad's reading A Ship Possessed and enjoying it.
Yeah, I saw it. We didn't have an opportunity to respond to it. All I can say is he'll get over it. So far, it's never caused any permanent damage. So
Yeah.
I think I was chatting away when that came up, so I didn't get a good chance to read it all. But that's great. That's great. That's one of my favorite books. That book scared me, and I wrote it. So
yeah, it was a good book. I enjoyed it. Not super funny though. I don't think there was a lot of comedic moments in that.
No, not so much. But in some of the adventures I did, and even the military ones, I used humor quite a bit because that's how guys relate, especially in tense situations. You either insult someone or you crack a joke. And so often in the worst possible time, somebody would say something funny or do something funny, at least funny to the reader. And I really enjoyed that. And of course, I was working with then Captain Jeffrey Strucker. He went on to become a major, I think, by the time we got to the last book. And he said that's what we do in the Army. That's what you do in special ops, is you resort to humor. That's what gets you through.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Ginny also mentions that putting the character in an embarrassing situation can be good to create humorous moments, and I agree with that. I would say actually that embarrassment is a very powerful emotion, and not only allows the reader to laugh a bit, but also allows them to empathize a little bit. If your character is laughing at someone who has been embarrassed, then that immediately puts the reader off. But if they are the one who is embarrassed, then that can be a really beautiful moment between reader and character that will really endear them to that. So embarrassment is great when it's done properly, and when we want to empathize with the character rather than laughing at the character. Let's see, she also wants to know if the germophobic girl is the one who sneezed on. Is that irony? I'd say probably not, because she's going to be hyper aware of being sneezed on, and you would expect that to happen. Kind of, what is it that's like rain on your wedding day? Well, that's not really unexpected. Like if it's your wedding day, there's a good chance, especially if you're in Seattle, you know. Whereas the one thing I think that is ironic in that song is what is it? The man who is afraid to fly, and the first time he gets on a plane, it crashes. And the idea there is that, well, planes never crash. Well, seldom crash. It's supposed to be one of the safest ways to travel. And everybody's telling him, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. And then, of course, that's going to be the one that crashes. So I think that would be a little more ironic there. I don't know. Pops, would you agree with that?
Yeah, it could be irony, I think. Though it would probably be, I don't know how to put it. It's maybe not creative enough, because that device is used a lot on television. You establish that somebody has a problem, so naturally it's going to be a problem. We'll go back to Sheldon in The Big Bang. You know someone's going to sit on his seat. You know someone's going to touch his food and he won't be able to eat it. So, and it's kind of funny, and it somewhat endears you to him, but also endears you to the other people who sometimes torment him because he's such a pain. But in that case, yeah, I would say that it was irony.
Okay.
I know you said it wasn't, but you know, this far north in California, it probably is.
All right. It also depends on who you're asking, but
That's true.
different people see irony different ways. But I do like,
which is
like
ironic,
Sheldon. There you go. Yeah. I like his complete, how he misses sarcasm completely, I think, is one of the funniest things. He's like, what is it? Somebody will say something like, well, do you want me to jump off a bridge? Would that make it easier for you? Would you do that? That would be great. So those, and of course now you come to expect it from Sheldon, but their chemistry is so good, and their timing, that's one thing we didn't talk about, is the timing of a joke. I guess we mentioned it a little bit at the beginning. Make sure it's at the appropriate time in your novel, but their timing, the punchline to the delivery to the setup is really good. You can also do what are called callbacks. You see it in stand-up comedians where they'll give you a joke up front, and then later on they reference that same joke. It's called a callback. Those can be very effective, especially if they become running gags. If you've got something that keeps popping up in your novel, You know, maybe you're writing a series and you have the same joke that comes up several times. That can be kind of fun because now the reader's in on it a little bit. Wouldn't overuse it, but that can be something that's powerful as well. I think we've exhausted our notes here, Pops. Any last minute comments
Yeah,
from you?
we didn't really talk about dialogue, and let me just read one short piece to get the idea of using dialogue for humor, even in serious work. This is from Mark Lehner's Tinker Tailor Toddler Spy. Tinker Tailor Toddler Spy. That's hard to say. The setup is this: a mother is putting a toddler to bed. The toddler's 4 years old. Toddler wants a song, and it's really about the toddler's father and the mother's husband. So the mother starts off, one song and you go to sleep. One, that's it. But daddy sings me lots of songs. Your father's weak. He's easily manipulated. I know that, mommy. It's wrong to take advantage. I know he's so acquiescent, pliable, docile, spineless. And the kid says, he's such a doormat, patsy, sucker. Yeah, sucker. This is the kid. That has the same view of the man that her mother does. And she's talking at a level you would not expect from a 4-year-old. So sometimes you can use dialogue, and that really, especially in fiction, dialogue is the best way, I think, to go with an addition of humor. Well, you still with me, Aaron? You're kind of frozen up on this side. And I show we're still live, but I don't show Aaron, so I can't tell if he's off or I'm off. Is anyone hearing me in the room? Well, we've come to the end of the program in case you can hear me, and thanks for being with us today. If you're listening to the audio only, be sure to go over to aarongansky.com and you can see the videos, or find them on YouTube, and you can see the video portion of this chat. Again, thanks for being with us. Happy writing.